Today is, of course, Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day to all the mothers among us. But this is a day not only to honor mothers, but really to give thanks in general for the blessing of family. And as Christians, we know that family is not limited by genetics. It's not even limited to what's sometimes known as the nuclear family, but the church is also a family. It was Jesus who first taught that when he said, "Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." The book of 1 John in the Bible is just filled with family terms. The writer addresses his readers as little children and teaches them to think of God as their father and also as one another as brothers and sisters. But one of the things that we need to always be cognizant of on a day like today is that family means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And that in Jesus' time, and for some people even still today, that family is also a unit that can serve as a barrier to separate insiders from outsiders. Now, when I was growing up, long ago, it's doubtful that anything in popular culture could have more effectively portrayed that kind of thinking than the TV show All in the Family. It was the story of the Bunker family, led by the patriarch Archie, who was highly opinionated. Archie did his best to run his household like a bunker, a bulwark holding out the evil influence of the outside world. Civil rights and women's liberation were, in Archie's mind, a threat to his sure and certain boundaries. In Archie's world, people of color did not belong in his neighborhood, and women belonged in the home, not the workplace. So I've said that kind of thinking is not really unique, though. Even among the Jews in Jesus' time, the chosen people, they kind of thought of themselves as a family that was to be set apart, separated from the Gentiles, those outsiders. For many of them, they perceived that as absolutely essential to their survival. Any good, decent Jew of Jesus' time just knew that there were certain places and certain people that shouldn't come in contact with. Certain people that were kind of out of bounds, so to speak. And so it might surprise us to discover that Jesus, self-respecting Jew, a Jewish teacher, a rabbi, in fact, chooses to violate those boundaries, chooses to step out of bounds. And that's the setting for this morning's gospel story. Jesus has gone to the city of Tyre in the region of Phoenicia. It is a place clearly out of bounds because it's in Gentile territory. While he's there, one of the locals confronts him because she apparently has heard of the kinds of things Jesus is able to do. We read about the story in the 7th chapter of Mark. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house. He didn't want anyone to know that he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and she bowed down at Jesus' feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin, and she begged Jesus to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the little children be fed first, because it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the puppies under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then Jesus said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home and found the child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Now, the little exchange that takes place between Jesus and the woman in the story, and that story might make us feel a little uncomfortable. It's certainly not the way we usually think of Jesus. But if we unpack the story, there's a lot going on there within the context of Jesus' culture. First of all, let me say that in our gospel stories, anytime that Jesus has these kind of public exchanges with people, there's always a lot more going on than what we're getting as 21st century Midwesterners. Anytime Jesus is asked a question in public, it's not like a Q&A session, especially when the Jewish religious leaders ask Jesus a question in public in front of the crowds. Usually, they're not really wanting to know an answer so much as they're trying to stump Jesus to see if they can make him look foolish and shame him in front of the crowds. In that culture, it's something they call an honor challenge. Because in Jesus' day, honor or good reputation was the thing that mattered most to people. It wasn't money and physical possessions that people wanted the most. What people wanted the most was honor or a good reputation. And so what happens between Jesus and this woman is an example of one of these honor challenges. And just like in sports, when there's a challenge, in these honor challenges also, there's typically, a winner and a loser. So here's kind of how it unfolds. First, there's the challenge. In this case, the woman offers the challenge, and it's not a question, it's rather a request that she makes of Jesus, healing for her daughter. Then that's responded to. In this case, the response comes from Jesus. And he says this little proverb, which we find kind of offensive, and the long and the short of it is simply, no. At this point, the ball is kind of thrown back into the woman's court. Next slide. For kind of a counter challenge. But the options here are really pretty limited. Not a lot of options to choose from. So here's the first one. The woman can forfeit her challenge. Jesus said no, and she can accept that no. She can back down and allow Jesus to keep his respectable, honorable position and just kind of go off. But if she does that, if she gives up, she doesn't get the thing that she wants the most, the whole reason for her coming to Jesus, which is the healing for her little daughter. So that's not a very good option. A second option that the woman could choose is she could choose to counter-challenge in a way that would try to get the best of Jesus, which is what happens a lot when Jesus gets into these discussions with the Jewish religious leaders. So she can kind of try to get the best of Jesus verbally, and if she does, she's going to be the winner in the challenge, but that probably also isn't going to get her what she wants, because generally when we humiliate people in public, they're usually not very cooperative with us afterwards. So that's not a very good option for her either. So what's this woman going to do? She needs to figure out a way to still treat Jesus respectfully so that his honor is maintained, but also to figure out a way to change his mind so that she can get what she wants for her daughter. So this woman is very, very clever. She winds up with success. And the way that she does that, it's a combination of her persistence, of her incredible love for her daughter, of her trust that this is something that Jesus is really capable of doing for her, and a lot of creativity on her part as well. And when all of that gets put together, it allows this woman to find a place at the table of salvation, even if for now that place is kind of under the table. So why am I preaching you this sermon on Mother's Day, aside from the fact that it's got a mother and a daughter in it? Well, remember when I started out, I mentioned that church is certainly a family, but that sometimes families serve to create barriers between insiders and outsiders. And this woman is certainly an outsider in this story. She doesn't belong to the Jewish family. She's a Syrophoenician. She's a Gentile. She's an outsider. She doesn't belong to the family, and yet she figures out a way to worm her way into the family. But here's the most exciting part of the story. what follows it. And don't worry, I'm not going to read it all to you, but you can go home and read it. Because what follows this story is that Jesus continues to travel through Gentile territory. After this, he's going to go to another Gentile city, and he's going to heal a man who's deaf. After that, he's going to continue through Gentile territory. He's going to teach this crowd of 4,000, and he's going to feed them with a miraculous multiplication of food. 4,000 people, all of them outsiders, or so we thought. So this Syrophoenician woman with her dogged faith, that was a purposeful pun, she seems to provoke Jesus' ministry to expand beyond the barriers and the boundaries. And because of her, the benefits of belonging to the Jewish family of God, those benefits become available for those who were thought or assumed to be on the outside. Jesus' encounter with her changes his ministry. After their encounter, Jesus immediately embarks upon this major mission to the Gentiles. Brothers and sisters, for a lot of us here this morning, this is a great day. We might be sitting next to our mother, or if we're a mom, we might be sitting next to one of our kids, or we might be with grandma or with an aunt. And yet, even on a day like today, we need to remember that there are also some, maybe even some in the sanctuary this morning, who may feel like they're on the outside today. Because maybe their experience of the nuclear family wasn't as warm and fuzzy as those Hallmark greeting cards portray. Or there might be some for whom their experience of the church family wasn't as warm and fuzzy as those United Methodist advertising campaigns claim. And while we can't change what goes on inside people's houses, we can change what goes on here on this church campus. And if this morning's gospel story teaches us anything, it teaches us that we ourselves have something to do and something to say about the people and places that God's grace can go. If we follow the example of this woman, then perhaps God's grace can be brought into some hard-to-reach places when we do a little reaching and stretching of our own. Friends, we're living in a time when the need for family is huge. We're living in a culture that's increasingly mobile. Most adult children no longer live where their parents live. Add to that fact that today's young adults are generally a rising percentage, I can see that slide, according to Pew Research, a dramatic increase from 30 to 42% within less than a generation of young adults who are single with no children. And that percentage is increasing. Now, I don't mean to imply by that young adults that are single, well, anyone that's single, is lonely. Lots of single folks have very exciting, meaningful, rich lives. But what a lot don't have is family living under their roof. But that's okay. Because according to Scripture, according to the church, family isn't defined as the people who live under our roof, at least not exclusively. For Christians, that's not the standard of the boundaries for God's family. But we need to also be realizing that if our Castleton family is going to grow, that it is going to mean that we need to do some reaching and some stretching of our own so that we can really open up the doors of God's house to all of God's people. A lot of today's young adults and people of other ages as well, a lot of them don't think of church as a place where they'd be welcome. Don't think about church as a place where they belong. To some of them, they might think of us as about as welcoming as Archie Bunker. 1/4 of today's young adults feel like the church judges them. 42% feel that the church is actually afraid of non-Christians, and maybe some of us are. So it's not going to be easy. It's going to take some work, but it's too important not to be done. It can begin with some easy steps, though. Coming up on June 3rd, our hospitality team is going to be offering a couple of short 20-minute workshops on Sunday morning to talk about things that we can do here on Sundays and throughout our week to be a little more gracious and a little bit more welcoming toward people, to help them experience the welcome of Christ through us. You can even start with something as simple as this morning. Before you leave the sanctuary, look around, look for somebody that you don't know, that you don't recognize, and before you leave, walk up to them, introduce yourself, ask them what their name is, let them know that you're glad to meet them, and that you're glad that they're here this morning. I'm going to close this morning with a video clip from a Francis Chan Bible study.
There was this guy that came to my church once, and he was a part of a gang, and decided to ditch everything and follow Jesus, and he got baptized. And after a while, though, he stopped coming to the church gatherings, and one of my buddies asked him, they go, "Hey, where you been?" He says, "When I got baptized," he goes, "I thought that it was going to be like when I got jumped into the gang." He goes, "When I got jumped into my gang," he goes, "suddenly everyone had my back. We became like a family 24/7. He says, "So when I got baptized, I thought, this is what's going to happen with the Christians." He goes, I didn't know that it was just Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights. He goes, "I thought it was going to be family." So he goes, I just had it wrong in my head. And yet when I heard that, I thought, no, you got it right. We've got it wrong.
You are beautiful, my sweet, sweet song. You are beautiful, my sweet, sweet song. You are beautiful, my sweet, sweet song. I will sing again.